I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
With hours to go before the potential shutdown of this federal government, we are posed with a single question. Vote yes to continue to provide services and support to our military, to our defense, to our communities, to law enforcement, or vote no and shut the government down. That's the question. And being told, by the way, for years that during the pandemic with the government shut down, that somehow people should just sort of fend for themselves, being told for years how great that was. We have an opportunity in this very moment to confront what is a real crisis for real people. Keep the government functioning. Continue to focus on appropriations. Drive down federal spending. But meet the needs and the expectations of the American people today. Vote yes to keep the government open. Vote no to shut the government down. I, on behalf of my constituents, will be voting yes to keep this government functioning. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Connecticut.
If I might, I'd like to read a letter that was sent by the Undersecretary of Defense, Michael McCord. And the letter was sent to the Speaker of the House as well as to the Senate majority and minority leaders, and it is just addressed to Leader Jeffries. I write to express the Department of Defense's deep concern with the absence of security assistance funding for Ukraine in the continuing resolution being considered in the House, or any similar continuing resolution that might be proposed. The Department of Defense is anxious to avoid a lapse in appropriations, but it is important that a CR protect our security interests and uphold our commitments and our values. As you know, the Department has been providing vital security assistance to Ukraine since Russia's unprovoked invasion in February 2022. Thanks to the bipartisan support of the Congress, it is just as vital today that we continue that support. Today, DoD has exhausted nearly all available security assistance funding for Ukraine. We are already out of funding for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, one of the 2 security assistance tools we have. The other funding tool we need are those funds provided to replenish our military's inventories for the weapons and supplies we've provided to support Ukraine in their fight via drawdown. We have only $1.6 billion remaining of the $25.9 billion that the Congress has provided. We have already been forced to slow down the replenishment of our own forces to hedge against an uncertain funding future, our own forces. Failure to replenish our military services on a timely basis could harm our military's readiness. Without additional funding now, we would have to delay or curtail assistance to meet Ukraine's urgent requirements, including for air defense and ammunition, that are critical and urgent now as Russia prepares to conduct a winter offensive and continues its bombardment of Ukrainian cities. For example, a lack of USAI funding now will delay contracting actions that could negatively impact the Department's ability to purchase essential additional 150mm artillery and critical munitions essential for the success of Ukraine's armed forces. This ammunition is critical to sustaining Ukraine's armed forces, including for their ongoing counteroffensive. An inability to ensure timely procurement and deliveries could undermine essential Ukrainian operations to retake additional territory or defend against potential future Russian offensives. It would also affect our ability to support Ukraine's land forces, including obstacle breaching equipment, sustainment of previously provided small unmanned aerial systems, systems to detect, analyze, and locate adversary signals, and demolitions equipment. It would affect training, maintenance, and sustainment of the equipment we have previously provided, exportability efforts, spare parts, and other activities to ensure the Ukrainian armed forces receive a full capacity. A funding cutoff would also send a negative signal to our defense industrial base, which we have asked to step up munitions production across the country, resulting in increased defense capacity, and higher employment. We cannot afford to throw that progress away. In fact, we are counting on it to implement our national defense strategy. It is important to note that from workers supporting Stinger and AMM manufacturing in Arizona to factories producing components for Patriot, interceptors, and GMLRS in Arkansas, this funding is strengthening the American economy and creating hundreds of new American jobs. Some have suggested that the department could still execute the mission and support Ukraine's needs if it were given permission to transfer funds from inside a short-term CR from our own needs to fund more security assistance. I want to be clear. The department does not support that approach, which will create an unacceptable risk to us. Under a CR, the department will be operating at a level approximately $25 billion below our budget request for fiscal year 2024, which was and is consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act of funding levels. The bottom line is we cannot sustain adequate levels of Ukraine assistance with transfer authority only. Delays to additional funding would also be perceived by Ukraine as a sign of wavering U.S. support and likely as a betrayal of our previous commitments. Allies and partners are also unlikely to sustain their increased level of support without clear, continuing U.S. leadership. As you know, Secretary Austin successfully engages over 50 nations every month to press for sustained support. It is crucial that the United States continues to lead this global coalition, and we need the resources to underwrite our leadership role. The Department appreciates your leadership on this vital matter, and I sent an identical letter to the Speaker of the House as well as Senate Majority and Minority Leaders, Michael McCord, the Undersecretary for Defense. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentlelady from Texas.
I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Despito, for 2 minutes.
Well, gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Speaker, while I appreciate the eloquent remarks from my colleague from Connecticut, I am from New York, and today we ask ourselves a very basic question. Are we voting and supporting to keep the United States of America open, to make sure our government moves forward, or are we drawing the line in the sand, putting Ukraine over the greatest country in the world, the United States of America? My colleague from Connecticut also mentioned that there was only 15 minutes given to her conference. I find it startling that you need more than just seconds to make a vote in support of keeping this government and supporting the United States of America. This is not today a Democrat issue. It is not a Republican issue. This is an American issue. And today we should all stand on this floor and support this continuing resolution in keeping this government open.
Gentlelady from Connecticut.
Reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I speak to the issue of Ukraine, I thought I might read the American citizens the 27th Amendment to the Constitution. No law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. Now, if you're watching this, I'm sorry that you don't have something better to do on a Saturday, but you need to know who's telling you the truth and who's not telling you the truth. Recently, you heard my colleague from Connecticut tell you that the Republican bill has a pay raise for members of Congress. It's simply not true. And if it did, it would be unconstitutional. And if the Senate bill changes the compensation for members of Congress, then it too is unconstitutional. Again, the 27th Amendment, word for word, no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. They are simply grasping at straws. They have intended to shut down the government from the start. With regard to Ukraine funding, I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I also happen to be on the Intelligence Committee, and I support the mission in Ukraine. But it is not a U.S.-led mission. It is a mission that the United States is participating in, and this continuing resolution will not do anything to hinder what the United States is doing with regard to Ukraine. We need to vote for this continuing resolution. We need to keep the United States government open. We need to keep the DoD funded and our soldiers funded, and disregard totally what you're hearing from the other side. They are grasping at straws, making excuses, and telling flat-out lies about member compensation as an excuse to vote against this piece of legislation. Let's keep the government open. Vote for this bill.
From Connecticut.
Continue to reserve.
She continues to reserve. Gentlelady from Texas. Gentlelady from Texas with 10 minutes remaining.
I yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Diaz-Balart, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we deal with a lot of complicated issues in this House. This is not one of them. Let's be very clear. 12 hours from now, the federal government shuts down if we don't act. This bill will fund the federal government for 45 days with a clean continuing resolution with just the addition of disaster funding. That's all this is. Let's not get too complicated. We are out of time. We either vote yes to keep the federal government open, or we will shut the government down. Again, this is not very complicated. We either vote to keep the government open by voting yes, or vote no and take responsibility for shutting down the federal government. This could not be simpler. This could not be easier. The American people are wise and they get it. It's hard to believe that some members of Congress would be confused on something so easy. I yield back.
Back. Gentlelady from Connecticut.
I continue to reserve.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentlelady from Texas.
I yield to the gentleman from Iowa, Ms. Miller Meeks, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady from Iowa is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my colleague for yielding to me. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of this continuing resolution to responsibly keep the government open for 45 days. Shutting down the government should be a last resort. My priority has always been to protect and represent my constituents to the best of my ability, and I cannot justify shutting down our entire government over obscure policy decisions. Government shutdowns have real consequences on American lives. You know, my dad was an enlisted master sergeant in the Air Force. My mom had a GED. They both worked. My dad often extra jobs on the weekend. I grew up watching my dad at the kitchen table calculate how long it would take to mail a bill so that the bill would get there after his one single paycheck a month came in. Every single month I watched that. He knew exactly how many days it took. A lapse in pay for these individuals means going without food. These are real people that would be affected by the political games both sides in Washington are playing. To our nearly 10,000 hardworking Iowans in our district who work for the federal government and are out of work, from heads of department to law enforcement officers to cafeteria workers, to the Iowa National Guard men and women who are protecting our southern border, I want to assure you that I will remain steadfastly committed to keeping the government open, because at the end of the day, I know your bills are still due. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Gentlelady from Connecticut.
I will continue to reserve.
She continues to reserve. Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Chair, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman, gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amedee.
The gentleman from Nevada is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the chairman of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee on Appropriations, which has very specific jurisdiction over member pay, I just want to say plainly and unambiguously, in the 70 pages in this thing, directly or indirectly, there is nothing that will lead to a member pay raise. That will be next week, where it is appropriately considered on the floor in terms of cost of living or other things on the floor. Yes, I will.
Thank you very, very much, my friend. I appreciate it. I would make reference to page 7 of the 71-page document. And in the Senate bill, I might add, they include a line that says that the Senate bill includes the blocking or the prohibition on a member pay raise. That has been dropped from the bill that has just been proposed.
Well,
so in fact,
reclaiming my time,
Gentleman
with all
controls
due
his time.
respect, the definition of a CR is you go forward. There is nothing to block in going forward with last year's. That language still applies. Thank you, good morning, and God bless America.
I think the gentleman yielded back his time. Gentlelady from Connecticut.
I'm proud to yield 3 minutes.